Today's work will be a bee tattoo that I have already designed. We will start by tattooing from the bee's leg upwards. We will be using a 7RL needle. First, apply Vaseline to the needle. For real tattooing, someone should assist by pulling and stretching the skin. I will then use a 3RL needle for the small details at the tips of the bee's legs. Apply Vaseline to the needle to help it glide smoothly. We use the 3RL needle for small details. Now, I've completed one of the bee's legs. Next, we will use an 11 curved magnum needle, or 11 RM. This 11 gauge needle provides consistent, even lines, especially for larger outlines. Watch closely as I tattoo. Particularly how I position my hand. I'm not applying too much pressure, but with larger needles, you may need to use more force compared to smaller ones. When sitting, make sure you're comfortable and your arm is free from tension. This line is a large outline, made with the 11 curved magnum needle. We aim to keep the line as even as possible, especially when turning corners or making curves. The smoother and more consistent the line, the better the tattoo will look. The skin must remain taut. If it's not, you may have to apply more pressure, which could cause the ink to spread beneath the skin. When connecting lines, be careful not to overshoot. Use the edge of the needle on one side to press down like this. We won't use it like this, as the needle might slip out of place. If you go beyond the line, the result won't look clean. Using the curved magnum needle to outline gives the tattoo a distinct texture. When viewed closely, you'll see a dotted pattern, unlike the results from using a tattoo machine. This is one of the unique aspects of bamboo tattooing. Now, I'll use a 5 curved needle to tattoo the smaller lines inside the top wing. When using a flat needle, it's essential to control your hand pressure evenly. If too much ink is deposited on the skin, we need to wipe it off, or we won't see clearly as we tattoo. As the lines meet, I'll touch up here slightly to ensure they connect well. The 3RL needle is typically used for narrow areas or places where longer lines are not necessary. I don't often use it for long lines. For longer lines, I prefer to use the Magnum needle. Small needles require frequent practice. If you can master precision with small needles, using larger ones won't be an issue. You don't need to hold the needle too far back. A shorter grip works fine as long as you can control the pressure. With time and practice, you'll understand the appropriate force for each needle size, which can be adjusted based on your design and style. There's no need to rush while practicing. Take your time. For large lines, if the ink doesn't take well, or if the color isn't as dark as you'd like, you can go over it again with a smaller needle to intensify the color. The angle at which the needle enters the skin is crucial. Ideally, have someone help stretch the skin. If you're working alone, it's still possible. But certain parts of the skin may be difficult to pull tight with one hand. If you can't stretch the skin properly, you may unintentionally apply more pressure than needed, which could affect the quality of your work. When using multiple needle sizes, it's a good idea to mark them so you don't accidentally mix them up. Now, I'll use the 3RL needle to tattoo the small part of the bee's leg. Always ensure the ink stays at the tip of the needle. If the ink isn't there, it becomes difficult to control the pressure, which may result in pressing too hard and ruining the line. Now, we'll continue connecting the lines like this. Next, we'll work on the bee's head. We'll use the edge of the needle to trace around the pointed tip of the head. If you feel resistance while tattooing a curve, pause and adjust your angle. If you force it, the line might end up crooked. For finer details, you can use flat needles like size 2, 3, or even 1. Watch closely as I tattoo. Notice the hand movement. The flat needle should glide lightly across the skin. As long as the ink stays on the needle tip, it will deposit smoothly with light pressure. For curves, tilt the needle accordingly. Tattooing on practice skin feels quite different from real skin, so be cautious. Watch how I position the needle at various angles. Sometimes the full needle edge touches the skin. Other times only part of it does. You need to adjust to keep the line as consistent as possible. When using flat needles on soft areas of skin, it can be challenging, as the ink may spread beneath the skin. Around the edges, the dots may be denser, creating a shadow effect. Dot work has its own charm and is a good way to practice concentration. The cleaner the dot work, the more beautiful the tattoo will look. Using the 3RL needle for dot work produces fine, beautiful dots. You must dot precisely, not randomly, as careless dots can ruin the work. I've made that mistake before. Dotting carelessly can spoil your design. So take your time and dot carefully. Observe the shading process. Shading, hand pressure and movement. The root area will be darker, and I will gradually space the dots out like this. Like this. Next, I will demonstrate how to tattoo English letters. I will use a 7RL needle and a 9RS needle. We will also use a 0.30 7 curved magnum needle. Let's get started. First, I apply Vaseline to my fingers and to the needle. Then, I test it out to see if it glides smoothly. I start with the 7RL needle. Tattooing from the back to the front. For this work, it will be solid black. I won't do much lining. Mostly, I will fill in solid black. The 7RL needle can also be used to fill in small spaces and details. If you need smaller, you can use a smaller needle. If you need larger, you can increase the size. For the dot on the letter I, which is a small detail, I will also use the 7RL needle, applying it gently and repeatedly to ensure the needles align closely together. Next, I apply olive oil, which helps prevent ink from spreading outwards. I will demonstrate this. If we don't have olive oil, when the needle touches the skin, it will smudge like this. It will be messy. When cleaning, it will also smudge like this. We must apply oil. This oil will also help erase ink and remove stains. The small inner lines can be done with the 7RL. Let's check if the lines are too small. They might be a bit too small, so I will switch to the 7 Magnum for the smaller details to ensure the lines are consistent. In areas that are difficult to curve or where it gets tight, we can go slowly. For solid black work, we go slowly and then wipe to see, applying oil and checking if the lines are well defined. Following my method, you can definitely do this. For beginners, for this side of skin, we position our hands and work like this while tattooing. In areas that are not very clear or where the needle doesn't fully touch down, the skin may be angled. For this side of skin, we position our hands and work like this while tattooing. If the needle doesn't fully land on the surface, and the skin in that area is slanted, we'll use the needle to slowly and carefully tattoo along the area. We won't tattoo as hard as we do when lining. We will gently tap. This way, the color will be consistent. We are not tattooing hard like lining. We will tap gently. For smaller areas, we will tilt the needle. We might need to tattoo like lining just for certain sections, as if we are just gathering details or lightly sketching. We'll tattoo lightly to keep the stencil from smudging. Tilt like this. Or tattoo the other side as I mentioned. Alternatively, we may need to twist the client's arm upwards so that the skin faces upwards. However, I will use the method of tilting my body. And it's important to have an assistant to pull the skin tight. You can tattoo alone, but for me, having someone to hold the skin is better for our work. It's better to have someone help stretch the skin. It saves time. If you really have no one to help, you can ask the client to assist. Or if you are tattooing a friend, have them help hold the skin tight. We will go slowly, tapping gently. The 0.30 needle is quite precise. When filling in solid black, it may go slowly, but the black color is smooth. However, if we use a larger needle, it may fill faster, but can appear grainy. It depends on your preference. These days, I use various needle sizes for more versatile work. The methods I am sharing are based on my trial and error to find ways to improve our work. Here, I will use the 7RL for some touch-ups. If I use the curved 7 Magnum, and then switch to the RL needle, we need to ensure that the colors blend evenly, because the 7RL needle will be darker on the client's skin. We need to be meticulous about this for a long-lasting result. If there's any part we are unsure about, we should stop and check for certainty before proceeding. We tattoo slowly, because correcting mistakes can be difficult. I have made all these mistakes before, rushing and being impatient. If we want our work to be good, we need to be patient. For any small details that need refining, we might need to use a smaller needle because the Magnum needle cannot capture details. I will use the 9RS needle with a pointed tip. So we must keep it sharp like this. Where we use the 7RL needle, the colors may vary slightly at the edges of the details. When using the 7RL, we must tattoo closely. If we don't tattoo closely, it may leave gaps between the dots. We need to be careful. I will primarily use the 7 curved Magnum needle to ensure a consistent color. Notice how, for small curves like this, we will do it as if we are lining. In small areas like this, we won't make the needle crosswise. We will tap slowly, as if we are drawing lines one by one to keep the lines parallel until filled. Like this. We will achieve sharp edges for the letters. The timing of our tattooing, whether fast or slow, will also affect the needle's performance. If we tattoo slowly versus quickly, the consistency of the color may differ. We need to observe closely to ensure uniformity. If there are any inconsistencies, we can gently touch up those areas slowly and softly. We emphasize detail, not speed. We focus on beauty and solid blackness. For this part, I will use the RS needle to refine the edges. We can adjust our needle sizes as needed, so feel free to experiment. When tattooing on the arm must be positioned like this, curving gently as we work. Curving gently as we work. The curved magnum needle cannot manage fine details, so we will use a smaller needle to help with precision. In areas where the magnum needle has limitations, I will use the RL needle. The 7 curved magnum needle can be quite challenging, so I will assist with the 7RL. This way, the edges will be sharp and clear, with a solid fill. If there are areas that lack curvature, we can refine those as well. For any small imperfections, we can touch them up gently. Use the edge of the needle carefully, tapping lightly. Tapping lightly. We can fill in solid black gradually, ensuring the lines are parallel. Our hand pressure must be consistent. Maintaining even strokes as we work our way up. Here, I will also use the 7RL needle to refine the edges for a more polished look. Observe my hands closely. Both the upper and lower hands need to move in sync. Pay attention to where it is thick or thin, ensuring our lines remain elegant and beautiful. For the small details, we will use the 7RL needle. Let's look at the letter E again. Like this. We can curve it gently here. But it requires a lot of skill. We will apply the edge of the needle slowly, using just the tip. Using just the tip, and not the entire needle. Watch as the ink flows along the needle we are using. If the ink is too thick, that's not ideal. We need to apply it gradually. A key point to remember is to manage the stencil carefully. If the stencil gets smeared, we must try to clean it off completely. Or we can wait and work on other areas first. We can return to clean up later. Sometimes, if we don't check closely, there may be leftover bits of the stencil that can lead to unwanted larger lines. We may tattoo precisely, but if we overlook those remnants, it can cause complications. If we don't wipe off the stencil completely and accidentally go over it again, the lines might end up too thick. At first, let's focus on achieving the desired shape and sharp edges before worrying about consistency. We can address color depth later on. For the final touches, we will ensure it appears fully black. In fact, solid fill work requires a lot of patience. We need to be mindful of the lighting as well, as bright lights can make it look like the ink is not adhering properly. Here, we tilt the needle similarly to how we draw lines, but we will fill in solid black where needed. For areas we want to emphasize, we can angle the needle as we tattoo, using the edge. Watch how I carefully apply the edge of the needle, cleaning as needed. In sections where there are fine details, we may choose not to tattoo right away. But instead, gradually build it up. The Magnum needle won't reach those fine details. We will need to use the smaller 7RL needle for that. Then, we can use the 7 Magnum needle to blend everything together. The ends of the letters will be small, and I will use the 7 needle to refine them. For the next step, we will use the 7 Magnum needle to achieve even color consistency. For areas with tiny details, I will use the 7RS needle. Pay attention to the angle of the needle as we work. If the stencil is about to fade, I may need to adjust my hand pressure to maintain the lines. If the stencil wears off, I need to be cautious. Work gently so the skin isn't damaged. The ink stays well, and you can smooth it out in multiple passes. If you apply too much pressure initially, the skin could be wounded when you go over it again. When focusing here, you need to tattoo in this direction. Like this. If positioned like this, it won't work well. It'll feel awkward and restrict your movement. You might need to stand or switch to the other side to tattoo more comfortably. The letter N is fairly large, so we can use a 7 Magnum needle. Start from the bottom and pay close attention. The bottom is smaller and curved, while it gets bigger near the end. Like this. Follow the movement of my hand. Like this. Follow the movement of my hand. The skin needs to be tight while we work, allowing for gentle tattooing without causing damage. Clients who bleed a lot may pose challenges. As the ink can mix with blood and clear fluid. While tattooing, it may seem like the ink is going in well. But once the skin heals and peels, the ink might not hold as effectively. It may look like it is faded. We need to clean thoroughly and ensure we see clearly. As we practice, we will start to understand how everything works. If we don't stop and carefully observe, we may need to adjust our technique if we have to reposition the arm upwards. We should keep our posture comfortable, allowing both arms to move freely without restriction. We should avoid tattooing in uncomfortable positions. We need to tattoo in a position where we can move our body comfortably. Tilting the needle like this helps refine edges. Use this method to keep things light. If we apply too much pressure while refining edges, it can leave raised lines. This may lead to uneven color distribution. This part of the line will be fine. While this area will be broader. We will tilt the needle, turning it slowly. Like this. If we want a wider stroke, we can use the needle for that. The tip will be smaller, while the base will be larger, giving us the desired shape. I might need to stand, as it can be awkward otherwise. If I don't stand and force the tattoo, the lines may curve in unexpected ways. Standing will help maintain the curve we want. Ensuring the lines are solidly black. We should try to keep the client's skin dry while we work. If their skin gets wet, it will complicate our work. Let me demonstrate what happens if the skin gets wet. I will use water and soap to illustrate how it affects the process. If the skin gets wet and we try to apply ink afterward, the color will spread. When working on the skin, the ink will spread out to the sides instead of following the needle's tip, making it difficult for us to see. The ink should appear round and adhere well. The ink follow the tip of the needle. But if the skin is wet, the ink will smudge. We won't be able to see how the ink interacts with the needle properly. Typically, the ink will flow smoothly like droplets on a lotus leaf. But if the skin gets wet, the color will smudge and not adhere well, making it difficult to see the true color. Next, we'll focus on tattooing English letters. I will use a 5RL needle, along with a 7RL needle and a 7RS needle. Just like before, we'll apply Vaseline to both the needle and our fingers. Remember, when tattooing by hand, the skin must be kept taut at all times. For the 3F, use 3 needles lined up in a single row. When tattooing, make sure to apply gentle pressure. If you press too hard, the needle will go too deep since it's a single row needle. This type of needle, the single row F needle, is suitable for creating sharp outlines. Don't forget to apply Vaseline to the needle tip. It helps hold the ink at the end. I'm going to tattoo lightly. Just a slight penetration through the skin is enough to catch the ink. If too much ink goes into the skin, we'll need to dab it off, keeping just enough for the ink to flow along the needle's tip. For small details, I will start with a smaller needle. If you want finer details, you should use a smaller gauge needle. A larger needle can finish the work faster, but it may not achieve the same level of sharpness. In tighter spaces, you can use the 5RL needle. It allows for detailed work, but it will take longer to complete. Here, I'm using a 5RL needle as an example. Now, with the 7RL, gently glide to ensure the edges are straight. This is an F needle. 3 needles in a single row will help us refine the details. If you want your letters to have sharp edges, we will use a smaller needle for precision. New trainees often ask why their tattoos don't stick. The key reason is that the ink isn't making it to the needle's tip. When I was a beginner, I encountered the same issue. In areas where the needle is flat, the F needle doesn't work as effectively for detail. In such cases, we may need to use RL or RS needles to help blend the dark ink smoothly, avoiding any streaks. Be careful not to let water touch the areas you haven't tattooed yet. If water gets on them, it will complicate your work. When ink touches the skin, the needle tip becomes less visible. The ink will spread on the skin, making it hard to see where the stencil is located. We can use RL needles to refine the F needlework. Once you're proficient with an F needle, you can use it for both line work and black filling. But in the past, I only used 4 needles, which took a long time and didn't achieve the best finish. Nowadays, we have a variety of needle sizes, and the tools are easier to acquire than before. The ink should flow along the needle tip like this. Now, using the RL needle, let's refine the curves. I'll adjust the needle slightly. Sometimes, if the needle is too small, we might need to widen it a bit. If it doesn't hold ink, it won't deposit it onto the skin properly. When using flat needles, if they don't penetrate fully, the ink won't be dark enough. We need to pay attention to how we apply pressure. Watch my hands closely. This is a 7RL needle. We can start with smaller lines, using the 7RL for finer details. For larger areas, we'll switch to a bigger needle to finish off the details later. Observe my hands. Both are assisting with the needle. The hand that pulls must move along to support the needle. Your left hand, which is stretching the skin, needs to move along as well. When using the RS needle, the needle's tip must align correctly. Follow the stencil closely as I tattoo. We'll do this in one pass, then two. Don't forget about lighting. It must be adequate. While connecting the lines, we should aim for a seamless appearance. Apply a thin layer of oil, and then we can use the 7RS needle for the thicker parts of the letters. We will tattoo in two passes, going down for one round, and then up for another. After 2 rounds, we'll refine the edges using a smaller needle. The smaller needle should be used closely together to achieve the sharp details that the client desires. Starting from the bottom, we'll work our way up slowly, ensuring the needle tips are close together. Until we reach the top edge of the stencil. Then, we'll slowly make our way down like this. Once that's done, I'll show you how it looks. The ink is solid, and the edges are sharp. This is where we use the RL needle for refining the small details. Try not to go beyond the outline. If you're still practicing, take your time and proceed slowly. Once you become more confident, you can speed up. Watch my hands closely. My left hand is both pulling the skin and moving slightly as needed. As you tattoo, your hand must adjust according to the area you're working on. If you find your hand can't reach a spot, you'll need to reposition it. For example, if you're tattooing here and the skin stretches too much, you'll need to adjust your grip. We don't need to hold the bamboo stick in just one specific way. Use what feels comfortable for you. If holding it short works better, then do that. Just ensure that your hand pressure remains stable and at the right angle.
น้ำหนักมือเรามั่นคงองศาได้นะครับองศาได้ติดนะครับนี่นะครับดูตามที่ผมสักนะครับเม็ดเข็มเรียง
Make sure the needle points are aligned properly on the skin. Each dot should be spaced evenly during each of the 2 rounds. We will not be pressing hard.
แรงนะครับน้ำหนักเราจะเบาไปเรื่อยๆนะครับ
Our pressure will gradually lighten because the skin has already been worked on.
ถ้าเกิดว่าเราสัก
If we continue to press too hard, the skin could become damaged, and the ink may not adhere well. The tighter the tattooing, the sharper the edges will be. If we think an RS needle might not work well, we can proceed with the RL needle slowly. Just like this. With the RL needle, the edges will be sharp. For beginners, take your time and don't rush. If mistakes are made, they can be hard to correct. The 7RS needle can be used, but using just that one might not give you the desired detail. In areas that should be thinner, it may not be as fine as needed. This part is thicker, so we'll use it to ensure the details are dark. When tattooing below, we shouldn't go straight down like this. If we do, the needle will only penetrate halfway or less. For RS needles, I recommend keeping it straight at least. Or you can angle it slightly to sharpen the lower edges. Be careful near joints. You should not press too hard, as the skin can easily become damaged. Our goal is to minimize skin trauma while ensuring the color adheres well. If there are any ink residues on the needle, we need to wipe them off. Just the Vaseline should remain. If there are any dry ink remnants, we need to clean them off, as they can affect visibility when tattooing the lines. We should carefully push the ink into the skin. When tattooing on the hands, make sure to shave any hair cleanly, as the ink can cling to the hair. Next, I will demonstrate the tattooing process, which will feature a compass design along with a world map. Today, we will be using 4 types of needles: a 5RL needle, a 5F needle, an 11RM needle, and a 7-curved magnum needle. For the smaller details where lines intersect, we can leave those sections for later refinement. I will use the outline for the interior, paying attention to where the lines connect. Be cautious with the angle of the needle as I tattoo. When angling the needle, it should be straight and done slowly. Beginners need to practice well. Poor practice can result in crooked lines. Follow my lead carefully, and you'll get the hang of it. We will refine the lines, particularly where they intersect. Let me show you how it looks. The lines should be full and curved. When tattooing small lines, some people hold their breath out of fear it might go crooked. The ink should only cover the very tip of the needle and flow with the needle's movement. If it's too much ink, it won't be effective and can lead to mistakes. If the ink isn't adhering properly, we need to apply some Vaseline to the needle's tip. We won't press the needle onto the client's skin without ink on it. See how we do this? We should only apply this amount. Pressing harder can cause pain and swelling. If the skin swells, it makes the tattooing process more difficult. Here, I am using a 5RL needle to work on the detailed edges of the map slowly. In areas with smaller details, if we practice on firmer skin, it will help. Avoid tattooing on softer skin, as it can be more challenging, and you will better understand how much pressure to apply. For finer details, if the stencil gets smudged, it will be hard to correct later. When we apply the stencil, sometimes it can shift, causing the lines not to be perfectly straight. We need to correct any uneven areas. If we want a thicker line, we can angle the needle. We can achieve a thicker line. When tattooing straight lines, your hand must remain steady. It's important that your hand remains steady to hit the edge precisely without going over. Otherwise, the work will be ruined. Now, we will use the ink sparingly at first to ensure that the stencil lines up correctly. Once we have the desired outline, we can make the lines thicker.
ย้ำให้เส้นหนาขึ้นนะครับนี่นะครับ
Keep your hand taut while tattooing and maintain a good hand pressure. Stretch the skin tight and tattoo slowly and evenly.
น้ำหนักให้ดีนะครับวางค่อยๆย้ำไปนะครับ
We will use the 7-curved magnum needle to refine the edges of the compass
ค่อย
gradually.
ๆไล่ไปเรื่อยๆนะครับค่อยๆไล่ไปเรื่อยนี่นะครับเดินเส้นตรงๆนะครับ
If the ink runs out, we must dip it back in.
เราจะไม่แทง
We will not use the needle without ink.
นะครับสีต้อง
The ink should always be on the needle tip.
นะครับเราจะใช้เข็มห้า
We will use the 5RL needle.
ดูนะครับไม่ใส่
Notice that I'm not pressing hard. I'm applying a light touch.
นะครับ
With the 5F needle, it's easier to create thin lines. Tattooing small lines is generally more difficult than larger ones, so always keep that in mind.
เลยนะครับสักยากนะครับเส้นเล็กแสน
Good lighting is essential.
พอนะครับ
If you can't see properly, don't
เรามองไม่
tattoo.
เห็นนะครับเราไม่สักนะครับเราจะไม่
Guessing
เอา
can lead to poor results.
งานเสียนะครับนี่นะครับเราจะให้สีลงไปติดที่ผิว
We will apply the ink to the skin gently and gradually.
ผิวแล้วเราก็จะค่อยๆย้ำนะครับดู
Watch my hands.
น้ำหนัก
Maintain a light touch
เบาๆ
and keep working slowly.
ค่อยๆย้ำช้าๆแบบนี้นะครับ
If the ink runs out, dip the needle lightly again. When I tattoo, the needle points will align like this. It's important to follow the needle movement carefully, proceeding slowly to create thick lines. If there are spots that didn't catch the ink well, we will clean them up later. Once you become skilled, you will recognize where the ink has adhered or not. Take your time. Everything has its own pace. If you want your work to turn out well, proceed slowly and patiently. I aim for lines like this. Not too thin. The 5 needle can be challenging to keep the lines close together, so you need to practice regularly. Now, I will use the 7 Magnum needle to create the thicker edges first, which will help avoid concerns about lines going too far outside. We'll use the 7 Magnum needle first. Observe how my hands work while tattooing. For areas that are difficult to reach, We will switch to the 5RL needle for small details.
เก็บให้ติดกันนะครับเก็บไป
We need to ensure the edges are sharp,
ตรงขอบอย่าให้เลย
so
นะครับ
focus on the outline.
เก็บขอบดีๆนะครับเลยแล้วจะไม่สวยนะครับเดี๋ยวเราจะใช้
I'll demonstrate how the Magnum needle can struggle with sharp
จะ
edges.
ชนขอบนะครับนี่นะครับ
Take a look after wiping it off.
ตรงส่วน
The edges aren't quite perfect yet.
ติดไม่ค่อยดีนะครับ
We'll use a smaller needle to clean up the edges a bit and tidy up both corners.
เก็บที่ขอบนะครับเก็บที่มุมทั้งสองด้านนะครับเพราะเข็มแม็กที่เราใช้นะครับมันโค้งนะครับเวลาไปถึงขอบไม่จะเข้าขอบไม่ค่อยได้นะครับผู้ช่วยผมด้วย
Watch
นะครับ
my assistant.
เวลาสังเกตมือที่
Pay attention to when my assistant stretches the skin while I'm tattooing.
รวมไป
You can follow along and do the same.
แบบต่างๆนะครับทำตามลองทำตามได้เลยนะครับถ้าเวลาเราสักน่องแบบนี้
When tattooing the calf,
ลูกค้า
if the client twitches,
ขากระ
we
ตุก
need to lift the
นะครับ
needle.
เราต้องยก
It's
เข็ม
crucial to
ขึ้น
be cautious,
เราต้อง
as any mistakes can ruin the work.
เข็มขึ้นนะครับ
Everyone's leg tends to twitch while I tattoo,
ระวังด้วยนะครับผมสักมาทุกคนขากระตุกทุกคนนะครับเรา
so we can just reinforce the lines at this point where the outer edge intersects.
สักตรงที่เส้นขอบนอกจะมาชนนะครับแล้วเราก็สักได้เลยนะครับ
I'll start tattooing from this side.
นี่นะครับนี่นะครับดูนะครับดูผมสักถ้าใช้เข็ม
If I'm using a straight needle, I may not need to angle it as much,
แต่ผม
but I prefer curved needles because I have more experience with them.
ใช้เข็ม
When I use a curved needle, it fits perfectly with the marking we made.
ขนาดใช้เข็มโค้งก็ใช้เข็มโค้งนะครับจะมาชนพอดีนะครับ สังเกตดูนะครับจะมาชนกับที่เรามาร์กไว้พอดีนะครับพอมาถึงมาร์กที่
When I reach the mark,
ไว้นะครับเราก็ใช้ขอบ
I'll gently tap it to ensure it blends well into the skin, creating a beautiful line.
เส้นเราก็จะได้เส้นที่สวยงามนะครับเส้นก็จะแบบนี้นะ
In some areas, I might have to stand while tattooing, just as I am now. Notice that my touch is very light.
ดูที่มือผมนะครับเบามากๆนะครับ
It's a dynamic shadow blended with ink. Our hands should remain light but keep the needle closely spaced together.
จะเลี่ยงถี่ๆนะครับ
Follow my movements closely and practice along with me. If you can master this, you could pursue a career in tattooing. Whether you want to become a serious tattoo artist or just explore it as a hobby, today's session will include black filling, shading, and some dot work. For today, I will be using a wooden handle that I had custom made with a high-quality stainless steel tip in 4 sizes. I will be using a 13 RM needle, a 0.35 millimeter needle, an 11 RM needle of 0.30 millimeter, and a curved 7 Magnum needle of 0.35 millimeter for the black filling. For the dot work, I will use a 3RL needle. If the ink doesn't flow well, we need to apply Vaseline. When the needle touches the skin, the ink should adhere like this. Here's the 13 Magnum needle, which is larger, so it may require more pressure than smaller needles because it is wider. When filling black, the ink may not appear smooth, so it's important to work carefully and precisely. If we tattoo delicately and lightly, with the needles aligned properly, the color will appear smooth. Let me show you how it looks. The color will come out evenly like this. For the areas on the fingers, we will use a smaller needle. The edges may not be as sharp as when using a flat needle, and may appear slightly dotted when viewed closely. However, from a distance, it will look smooth. The flat side of the needle will be positioned at eye level. When we want a sharp edge, we need to tilt the needle down more on this side, because we intend to keep this edge sharp. Use the edge of the needle to gently blend along our stencil. For black filling, there is usually no need to use a lining needle. We only use sharp needles for small details or for dot work. If we practice frequently, we will improve. This is how I usually tattoo, about like this. However, for beginners, it may take a little time, and both hands need to work in harmony. Follow my lead. I will outline the edges first, as the stencil might be erased. I will use 100% black ink for this area because it needs to be dark. Let me outline first so it doesn't get erased. The RL will be used to create dots, resembling shading in this section. For areas where we want the dots to be dense, we may apply more pressure. Where we want them to be softer or smaller, we should only dot once, about like this. The color may not be very dark, and the dots will be small. As we approach the black color, we will make the dots closer together, gradually increasing the density. The 13th needle will align like this, forming orderly dots. In reality, while tattooing, after about a day, the color will appear darker. Pull the skin, as you can see with my left hand. It needs to help stretch the skin. Besides having an assistant to pull, our hands must help pull as well. Gradually apply pressure. The dots should connect, extending them inward. Dot carefully to ensure they look uniform. The more detailed we can dot, the smoother the image will appear, making the shading look uniform. This part will be lighter in color. Let's leave the dots spaced out for now. We will use black at the edges and emphasize the darkness, ensuring there isn't too much distance between the dots. If the needle is too far apart, the skin will start to bleed and we may see fluid, making it more difficult when we go over it again. Generally, we should not exceed 3 passes to ensure they adhere properly. Aiming for a deep color. If we keep the edges detailed and dark, maintaining the shape, we can gradually apply pressure toward the dots. We should avoid having the dots and black filling look different. They should blend seamlessly. If the dots and black don't merge well, we may need to add more dots to create a cohesive surface. This area will feature both lighter and darker colors. This area is a bit light. I will be using 100% black and applying appropriate pressure. And I will angle the needle as if outlining, making it look like lines. Close to the dots, we won't make it too dark, as we will dot to create a shading effect. When tattooing, be cautious and pay attention. There will be moments when the skin may bounce, and certain softer areas might move, so we need to be careful. We must watch out for the needle piercing our hands. For this part, I'll be using an 11 Magnum needle. In the areas close to the dots, we won't emphasize darkness too much. We will gradually blend the edges to ensure they are uniform. The edges should be sharp. But we don't want it to look like lines. We want the dark to appear as a single solid area. The outer edges will be dark without standing out like raised lines. You can see the edges here. They are smooth and dark. Now I will use a 7 Magnum needle for the finer details in the hand area. 7 Magnum 0.35, which will easily adhere well due to the larger needle size. This area has soft skin, so we need to tattoo carefully. The skin is soft and bouncy, making it challenging to tattoo. We need to pull the skin taut like this. Notice my hand. It should be gentle and slow, as this part of the skin is delicate. We must strive to make each pass effective. For beginners, practicing often is essential, especially in areas with softer skin like the inside of the arms or the stomach, where tattooing can be quite challenging. For those still learning, it's advisable to tattoo on taut skin. When tattooing on softer skin, we may misjudge the pressure, leading to the risk of piercing ourselves. If you are just starting, I recommend working on areas where the skin is tighter, as it will be easier to adhere to. If you struggle, you might feel discouraged. In this section, if the black color isn't smooth, I will use the 7 Magnum needle to gradually refine it. Try to find an assistant to help hold the skin. If you must tattoo alone, some areas may take longer to achieve precision. If I may suggest, having an assistant is beneficial. I will make 2 passes here. If using a 13 Magnum needle of 0.35 in soft areas, we may need to go back and forth about 4 times. Using larger needles will make it harder to penetrate the skin. When hand poking, using a larger Magnum needle for soft shading is effective because it can provide a smooth and beautiful blend. Smaller needles penetrate the skin more easily, but are slower to fill. Each has its pros and cons. Detailed work takes time. And a tattoo is something that stays with a person for life. In cases where the client moves, like when they twitch, our right hand must pull back quickly to avoid going too deep into the skin. The right hand must maintain control. Otherwise, it might penetrate too deeply into the skin. The right hand must maintain control. You can follow my lead and imitate my actions. Observe my hand position, particularly my left thumb and index finger. Notice my left wrist. I'm pulling it taut while moving my thumb and index finger. Tattooing requires focus, and while working, we practice concentration, precision, patience, and many other skills. On the inside, we'll dot closely together while the outer dots will be spaced apart. The more consistently we can achieve this, the better. Strive for the best results. Once we're done, we'll clean up and review the work. In the next segment, I will demonstrate hand tattooing using a 7-curved Magnum needle size 0.30, along with 7 RL and 3 RL needles for tattooing the back. Generally, I prefer having clients sit, as lying down can make the skin difficult to stretch. Don't forget to apply some slippery Vaseline on the area. The 7 Magnum needle can be used for both straight and curved lines. When tattooing a curved line, I will ensure the ends are not too dark. Be cautious while tattooing. Try to keep the lines aligned. Using olive oil will help you see the ink flow along the needle. When the lines are meant to touch, I tattoo like this. Ensuring a consistent weight and adherence without going over. If there are spots where the ink doesn't adhere, I will go back and reinforce lightly. For this hand tattoo, notice that I will use this part to stretch the skin. The paper underneath will help prevent slipping. I don't like using a very dark stencil because if it's too dark, it can be hard to see while tattooing. For the straight lines, especially along the crescent edge, I stand like this. I avoid standing awkwardly as it makes tattooing less comfortable. And the lines don't turn out as well. We want to keep the straight lines vertical, coming straight down. I tattoo in this position. For angled lines, I will tilt the needle and tattoo horizontally like this. We'll tattoo with the needle at a flat angle like this. For shorter lines, we may use the RL needle instead, adjusting based on what's appropriate. Here, I'm using a 7 RL, size 0.30.
สักเส้นเล็กๆนะครับ
For smaller lines, I also tilt my hand similarly. Angling it upward. When tattooing, it can feel awkward if you try to force it. So it's important to find a comfortable position. There are two methods. One is to tattoo like this, and the second is to tattoo from below at an angle. Let me show you this first method. It might be a bit challenging, but still doable. When tattooing straight at a 90-degree angle, we don't pierce at an angle. If you pierce at an angle, the dots may not be round or look as nice. For this side of the tattoo, I will move to the other side. Notice how I position my body. I always keep my hand on the skin. This hand will consistently pull the skin throughout the tattoo process. Besides having an assistant to stretch the skin, my left hand also assists in keeping it taut. The 7 Magnum needle is one I use frequently while working. When two lines touch, we will lightly reinforce them. For the bottom line, we will turn the needle, while for the top, we will curve upward. The needle should remain above the wood. When curving upward, we have two options. We can either move the needle in a circular motion like this. The needle tip should be positioned on top of the stick. Or tilt downwards. We must not tattoo straight down in one go. Take your time. The technique I'm demonstrating is one I'm comfortable with. I recommend following what feels natural. As we reach the junction of the lines, we'll blend them evenly, reinforcing the ink at the connection point to ensure consistency. Keep the needle angled according to the stencil. And remember to curve gently. If you're just starting, take it slowly, and don't rush, as this will affect the quality of the lines. We want to ensure the lines meet precisely without going beyond. As we approach the curve, be mindful of how we handle it. Watch my right hand as I rotate the needle. Watch my right hand as I rotate the needle. We'll move to the vertical line next. The technique remains the same. with careful angling as we transition into the curve.
โค้งนะครับก็ค่อยๆนะครับค่อยๆเลี้ยวนะครับ
If you're still getting comfortable, you might use an RL needle of a similar size to create curves.
ขนาดใกล้เคียงกันกับเส้นตรงมุมนะครับเราใช้ RL แทนนะครับมือ
Maintain a steady, straight hand as you gently curve.
ค่อยๆโค้งแบบนี้นะครับเราจะไม่ใช้
We won't use a larger needle.
นะครับเข็มเล็กหน้า
A smaller, wider needle is preferable.
ความกว้างของเข็มนะครับต้องพอดี
ensuring the width matches the curve you're working on. Tattoo according to the stencil.
ค่อยๆสักตามสเตนซิล
Taking care to wipe off any excess ink if needed.
เลอะมากเกินไป
Avoid applying too much color in one area.
ดีนะครับ
The round lines can be tricky and may become uneven if not careful. My right hand will rotate continuously, keeping the needle angled to follow the curved stencil.
บิดไม้ตะแคงให้หน้าเข็มไปเอียงไปตามสเตนซิลที่โค้งนะครับตัวลาย
The dot design won't be too dense.
ถี่นะครับเราจะดอทแค่ไม่ให้
We'll dot just enough for the camera to avoid excessive white space. The color and needle tips must be in sync.
สัมพันธ์กันนะครับ
As we curve down, keep your hands steady and follow the shape, lightly and evenly spacing your lines.
โค้งลงมานะครับ
As we finish this area, if you notice any spots that appear uneven, lightly reinforce those areas.
ทีนะครับทีดูตามมือผมนะครับ
Follow the curve of the stencil.
จนสุดนะครับ ตรงไหนที่มันเป็นแดงๆนะครับเหมือนติดบ้างไม่ติดบ้างเราก็ย้ำเบาๆนะครับ
It's crucial that there's ink on the needle. Never press with an empty needle, as this can cause unnecessary pain for the client. Ensure you have ink and are tattooing effectively. If you wipe and it adheres, you're on the right track. Observe closely. The lines should come out looking like this. The weight should be lighter towards the ends.
ปล่อยเหมือนที่นี่นะครับดูตามมือผมนะครับน้ำหนักจะเบาลงนะครับน้ำหนักจะเบาที่ช่วงปลายนะครับ
Resembling a subtle shadow. I will now demonstrate from this side. Lightly observe the lines. They should be almost invisible because we'll go back and reinforce them. Maintain consistent spacing for an aesthetically pleasing result.
ตามมือผมเลยนะครับ เราพยายามเว้นระยะให้สม่ำเสมอนะครับจะสวยนะครับ
Additionally, the 7 curved magnum needle can also create patterns resembling small lines.
เป็นขีดเล็กๆนะครับเดี๋ยวผมทำให้ดูนะครับ
Let me demonstrate this for you. Use a light touch. We'll tattoo just once and leave spaces between the needle marks to create a circular detail.
ทำเป็นลักษณะเป็นวงกลมนะครับจะเป็นแค่ลาย
This will be just a small aspect of the design. For this piece, we will be working with a floral design using a 7RL needle. I will heat the tip to make it larger. We will also use a 7-curved magnum needle at size 0.35 and a 7-curved magnum needle at size 0.30. We will use the 7-curved magnum needle at size 0.30 for outlining the outer edges, and the 7-curved magnum needle at size 0.35 for coloring. The 7RL will be used for tattooing the stamens and the inner dots. Remember, when tattooing dots, try to keep the needle at about a 90-degree angle. For each dot, if you want it to be darker, do about 3 to 4 passes over the same spot. You can rotate the needle slightly to make the dots round. Next, we will work on the stamens, particularly the longer ones. We will make the top larger while keeping the bottom smaller. I will use the 7-curved magnum needle for the outer lines. If there's too much ink, we need to wipe it off. The ink should be just enough to flow along the tip of the needle. The ink should be just enough to flow along the tip of the needle. If there's too much ink, we won't be able to see where the needle is going. And we won't see the tip of the needle clearly. Watch my hands as I curve the line. My right hand will twist the needle as I work. We will tattoo this area first, before the stencil fades. Rotate the needle according to my movements. When curving, my hand will twist the needle, and I will move the other hand in sync. While curving, move your left hand as well, while rotating the bamboo stick with your right hand. We will slowly curve the line so that it connects smoothly. We will take our time with the lines, as we will be coloring afterward. If the tips are sharp and we're not yet proficient, we will use the 7RL to refine the details. When we get to the edges, if we're not comfortable with curving the lines to connect them, we will get as close as possible and then use the 7RL to define the ends for clarity. This way, we won't force the 7 magnum needle into areas where it's difficult to detail.
แล้วเราก็จะใช้เข็ม7 RL นะครับมาเก็บตรงส่วนปลายนะครับเพื่อรายละเอียดที่ชัดเจนนะครับเก็บที่ส่วนปลายแบบนี้นะครับส่วนไหนที่เข็ม
Wherever it's difficult to get fine details with a magnum needle, we won't force it. We'll use the small needle to clean up the details later.
มุมเล็กๆแบบนี้นะครับหลังจากนั้นเราถึงจะใช้เข็ม7 แมกนัมโค้งมาสักต่อนะครับผมจะเริ่มที่
Starting from the bottom edge,
ล่างนะครับช่วง
we must ensure the lines meet precisely.
ให้ถึงเส้น
No overshooting.
เลยนะครับเวลา
If the ink runs out, we need to dip the needle again. If there's no ink dripping down the needle, we must dip it. Otherwise, the tattoo won't adhere properly.
โค้งนะครับ
Curve along the stencil.
รอยสเตนซิลนะครับถ้าเราไม่ถนัดเราต้องบิดนะครับเส้นแบบนี้นะครับเราต้อง
We must angle the needle appropriately,
โน้นนะครับ
whether twisting it one way or the other, to avoid straining our hands.
ค่อยๆย้ำนะครับค่อยๆย้ำให้เส้นติดกันนะครับช่วงที่เส้นต่อ
During this phase where the lines meet, we will ensure the ink is as consistent as possible on both sides. For small details, we will use the 7RL around the edges. Watch my hand as I tattoo with the 7 Magnum needle. As you can see, if my hand starts to take an awkward position, it means I'm straining myself. We need to adjust our chair or stand up to tattoo more comfortably.
แบบนี้นะครับแบบนี้จะถนัดมากกว่านะครับช่วงที่เส้นติดกัน
During the sections where the lines connect,
เราต้อง
we should make sure the ink is even.
ให้หมึกสม่ำเสมอกันมากที่สุดนะครับเก็บรายละเอียด
Use the 7RL to capture the finer details. When tattooing the curves, we need to go slowly and steadily. We will use 7 curved Magnum for this line.
สักเส้นต่อนะครับเส้นอยู่แนว
We will use the needle to angle and curve,
โค้งแบบนี้นะครับ
tattooing in a way that aligns with the
ผ
stencil.
มจะยืนสักนะครับเริ่มจากด้านล่างนะครับค่อยๆ
Slowly.
นะครับส่วนโค้งเราจะค่อยๆสักนะครับค่อยๆสักแล้วก็
Slowly.
เข็มไปด้วยนะครับเป็นมุมโค้งแบบนี้นะครับโค้งแบบนี้เราจะ
It's curved like
โค้ง
this.
แบบนี้นะครับต้องยืน
Stand like this.
ตามผมนะครับมือนะครับมือตึงนะครับ
Make sure your skin is taut.
ฝั่งนี้ก็ดึงให้บริเวณ
This will make it easier to
ตึ
tattoo.
งนะครับผิวตึงเราก็จะสักง่ายนะครับตรงไหนที่
For softer areas, we need to lighten our pressure.
เบามือลงนะครับ
This part of the arm has relatively delicate skin.
ผิวบางกว่าส่วนอื่นนะครับแบบนี้สามารถสักคนเดียว
If you're
ได้นะครับ
tattooing alone,
เราก็จะ
you can hold the skin taut with one hand.
แบบไม่มีผู้ช่วยนะครับผมจะใช้มือนี้มือฝั่งที่จับ
We will use the right hand to pull the skin first,
ตึงครับ
then the left hand to stretch it further.
มือซ้ายนะครับดึงลงมานะครับเราจะสักนะครับ
This is tattooing without an assistant. Next, the line will curve like this. I will adjust to this position to make the line parallel to our line of sight. We will sit like this, using the left hand to hold the skin in place. If you're unsure, you can use your right hand to gently touch the skin to check if it's stretched enough. We will start with dots at the marked spots, spacing them appropriately to avoid them being too close together. Aim for even spacing. If you feel like your hand is straining, adjust your position and find the right angle. On the arm, you can't pull the skin like this. You need to pull it like this. You can't pull it this way. It has to be pulled this way. Move slowly and carefully, doing it in one pass. This is for the petals, which will be a greenish color. Now we will apply Vaseline, just like before. Apply it to our hands and the needle. Check to see if there are areas where the ink is not enough, and gradually add more. We will lightly dab. It's important that the skin is taut. If the skin is tight, a gentle touch will suffice. The ink must adhere to the skin. If it doesn't, we need to use oil or Vaseline. The process of coloring is similar to filling in with black. The way we use the needle is also quite similar. For the corners, we will gradually dab the ink. If the ink isn't sticking to the needle, we must dip it into the ink again. Otherwise, the ink won't go into the skin. Green ink is done. But if we press too hard, we could cause bleeding. In areas where there is blood, it will be harder to see the color. I will clean the needle now. Next, I will use yellow. We need to be very gentle with the yellow. Otherwise, if blood starts coming out, it will make things difficult. Take it slow and easy, like this. We will go along the edges of the spots we marked, gently tattooing and dabbing. Even with light pressure. If there is bleeding, we need to be careful with how we introduce the color. We will try to be as gentle as possible so that we won't see any blood stains, allowing the color to be more visible. If we press too hard, the yellow will not adhere well. Or if it does, it won't be even. When there's yellow and blood mixed, it becomes challenging to see. I will apply Vaseline to have a clear view of the color. If we apply olive oil, the ink will flow along with the needle like this. I will tattoo with red while leaving a gap between the red and yellow. Clean the needle. If too much ink sticks, wipe it off. Between the stamens, we will leave a white gap to create space. We will make a border on both sides using the needle's edge. Coloring will be similar to filling in black. Here, we're not creating a shadow. We're going for a solid shade. Remember, your hands need to be steady. Keep your hands steady so the ink flows along with the needle. If the ink isn't flowing well, we might need to dip the needle in water first and then into the ink. If the ink is too thick, it won't flow well onto the skin and will just stick to it. Check to see how the ink looks. If there are any spots, we need to refine them carefully, gently dabbing to ensure the finest details. If our technique is precise, doing about 2 passes should make the ink adhere completely. If the ink continues to flow along the tip of the needle, and we can see the ink sticking to the skin, we can proceed with tattooing. We can gradually spread the ink like this. Allowing us to see the ink flowing with the needle's tip. I will use the needle's edge to create the border. Remember, the ink must flow along the tip of the needle. We shouldn't puncture without ink. Doing so won't achieve any adhesion. If you're tattooing alone without an assistant, the left hand must apply more force than usual. I will repeat this process 2 to 3 times to ensure the ink adheres thoroughly. I will use the 7 needle that I just used to apply white ink to the inner border that we left blank. We only need to lift the needle slightly and tattoo very gently. As blood will push out and obscure the white ink. We need to be very light, slowly pushing the ink in, gradually blending it. Slowly. I want the white ink to stand out prominently. Check the ink. The white is quite thick and will stick well. We will dab gently and slowly, working the white in gradually. I want the white to rise and stand out clearly. Next, I will demonstrate how to use the 7 curved magnum and 11 curved magnum needles, as well as the 15RS and 9RL needles for detailing. We will start with the outer lines, using the 7 curved magnum for thin lines. When it comes to curves, stand like this. The needle should always be positioned above our tool. When approaching corners, we need to keep everything aligned, making sure they touch perfectly. The tip should be sharp. The lines should follow the design we created. When turning, do so gradually, following our lines. Practice slowly. The flat tip of the needle should be parallel to the line at all times. If we don't have a proper tattoo bed, our client may have to sit like this, and we should find something to support their back, similar to how they are sitting now. In curved areas, we should go slowly because we're not using round needles. We're using flat needles. We must continuously rotate the needle along the stencil design. We will gradually turn the needle.
ลายเส้นนะครับลายเส้นสเตนซิลของเรานะครับนี่นะครับ
With the right hand, turn the needle slowly. In curved areas, rotate the needle as well, keeping it aligned with the stencil design. หมุนให้ตามรอยสเตนซิลไปนะครับ Each line should adjust according to the angle that feels comfortable for you.
ที่เราถนัดนะครับ น้ำหนักมือที่เรา
The pressure of your hand should remain consistent. When tilting, adjust the needle's angle accordingly.
ไปตามนะครับ
Coordinating the movement with your hands sliding left and right.
เลื่อนขวานะครับ
If your hand reaches its limit, you must shift your position and tilt left or right as needed.
เอียงขวาให้พอดีนะครับก็มีบางครั้งอาจจะต้อง
Sometimes we may need to rebind the needle for better detail.
สักไปอาจจะต้องมัดเข็มเพิ่ม เพราะว่าเข็มบางอันที่เรามัดไว้
If some needles we bound earlier do not fit properly, we must rebind them.
เราต้องมัดเข็มใหม่นะครับ เราจะไม่
We won't force ourselves to use inappropriate tools,
ใช้เครื่องมือที่ไม่เหมาะสมกับงานนะครับถึงฝืน
as that could lead to wasted time and poor results.
อาจจะเสียเวลานะครับเผลอๆงานเสียนะครับ ช่วงเข้ามุม
When approaching corners, be cautious and take your time. The two sides should be as similar as possible.
ภาพสองฝั่งเหมือนกันนะครับ เราต้องสักให้ใกล้เคียงกันมากที่สุดนะครับ แบบนี้นะครับ แบบที่ผมสักอยู่นี้นะครับ คือกรณีที่
The work I'm demonstrating is on the upper part of the client.
สูง
We may need to stretch while tattooing.
ลูกค้านะครับ เราอาจจะต้องยื้อสักนะครับ ยื้อแบบนี้นะครับ ไม่เหมาะนะ
If this position isn't suitable, we should find a chair for support while tattooing.
เราต้องใช้เก้าอี้มาลอง
Observe my example carefully.
ลองแบบนี้นะครับ ดูตัวอย่างตามผมเลยนะครับ ปลายด้านบนนะครับ เข็ม7แมกนัม
The 7 Magnum needle will be used here.
เราใช้นะครับ เราก็
When using it, we will press the needle tips closely together.
รีดให้ปลายเข็มไม่ห่างกันมากนะครับ ถ้าปลายเข็มห่างกันมากนะครับ จะมองเป็นเวลาสัก
If the tips are too far apart, you will see two lines that appear parallel.
เข็มเราต้อง
The tips must be close together.
ติดน้อยติดมากก็แล้วแต่เรานะครับ ถ้าเข็ม
The closer they are, the thinner the line will be.
แนบกันมากนะครับ
During curves, they need to be beautifully shaped.
เข็มแนบกันน้อยเส้นก็จะใหญ่นะครับ ใหญ่ขึ้น เ ช่วงโค้งนะครับต้องให้โค้งนะครับโค้งจะสวยงามนะครับส่วนไหนที่เรายังไม่รู้สึกว่าเรายืนสักแล้วมันขัดนะครับเราก็ยังสามารถสักต่อไปได้นะครับถ้ายืน
If you feel that your position is uncomfortable while tattooing,
ก้มมากเกินไปนะครับ
you can change sides.
สลับข้างเราจะ
We will alternate sides.
สัก
Tattooing both the left and right sides similarly. Go slowly around the curves.
ดูแล้วก็
You can
ทำตาม
follow along.
ทำตามที่ผมสักนะครับ
When tattooing a curve, make sure to rotate the needle accordingly.
หมุนปลายเข็มไม่โค้งนะครับถ้าตรงไหนเรา
And if you find an awkward angle,
เราอาจจะต้องขยับจน
adjust
กว่า
until
จะ
comfortable.
เรา
We should
จะ
not
ได้
force
เห็นว่า
ourselves.
เส้นจะเบี้ยว
Otherwise, the lines may become crooked.
เส้น
You can
จะ
reinforce the
ไม่ได้
lines.
สักแรงนะ
We're not applying heavy pressure but ensuring they are solid.
ย้ำเวลางานหายแล้วเส้นก็จะใหญ่
Once
นะครับ
tattooed,
จะใหญ่
the lines will expand slightly.
เส้นจะขยายออกนิดนึงนะครับส่วนที่โค้งนะครับเส้นเล็กของเรา
After finishing the thin lines, I will switch to a larger needle.
จะใช้เข็มเบอร์ใหญ่นะครับเบอร์ใหญ่ขึ้นสักเส้นใหญ่ให้ดูนะครับผมจะใช้
The 15RS needle is about 3 to 4 times larger than the outer lines. เราจะขยับหา We will adjust to find a suitable position that feels comfortable.
เหมาะสมนะครับที่เรา
If a position feels awkward, don't force it.
ถ้าไหนไม่ถนัดเราไม่ฝืนสักนะครับไม่ฝืนสักนะเดี๋ยว
Otherwise, the lines will not turn out well.
ส่วนตัวผม
I will prepare additional needle bindings in case we need them to avoid wasting time during the process.
มัดเผื่อไว้ว่าเผื่อเราได้ใช้นะครับถ้าไม่ได้ใช้เราก็ไม่เป็นไรนะครับเราจะได้ไม่เสียเวลาเราทำงานนะครับถ้ารายละเอียดค่อนข้างใหญ่
If the detail is quite large, we can use the magnum needle directly without needing a smaller needle.
ช่วงปลายแหลมช่วงปลายโค้งนะครับสักได้นะครับเราไม่ต้องใช้เข็มเล็กช่วยนะครับฟันด้านบนนะครับฟันด้านบนอีกฝั่งหนึ่งนะครับเดี๋ยวจะสัก
Now, I will use the 15RS to fill in the lines.
ใช้ 15S เดินเส้นเลยนะครับ เราย้ำทีๆนะครับ
making sure to create deep, dark lines with 2 passes.
เราจะใช้15สักด้านในนะครับสักตรงที่เป็นส่วนโค้งๆนะครับนี่นะครับ15
I will use the 15 RS in the curved areas, similar to how we will do in the eyes.
เดี๋ยวหลังจาก
Once the eyes are finished,
ผมจะใช้เบอร์11 Magnum
I will switch to the 11 Magnum needle.
เส้นใหญ่นะครับ
The curved Magnum needle, size 11, hasn't been modified.
ไม่ได้แต่งเข็มนะครับเข็ม
This is the standard size.
ปกตินะครับ เราจะย้ำนะครับ
Angling it to create bold lines.
เส้นใหญ่นะครับ
We will carefully follow the stencil lines until we achieve the desired thickness.
เส้นใหญ่
It's not just about having thick lines. They need to be curved and visually appealing as well.
เราจะ
We will do this as if we're tracing the lines,
แต่เราจะ
gradually filling in from top to bottom.
จากบนลงล่างนะครับบนลงล่างบนลงล่างให้ขนานกันนะครับค่อยๆย้ำให้ขนานกันไม่เหมือนเดิน
It's not like lining,
นะครับจะเหมือน
but it's more like filling.
มากกว่านะครับอย่าลืมนะครับยังไงก็อย่าลืมเวลาเราสักทุกครั้งนะครับสี
Remember,
วิ่งไป
when tattooing,
ถ้าสีไม่วิ่ง
the ink must flow with the needle.
นะครับไม่ติดสีอาจจะวิ่งไปเล็กน้อยถ้าสีวิ่งไปเล็กน้อยนี่คือเราต้อง
If the ink isn't flowing properly, stop and dip the needle in the ink.
นะครับเส้นโค้ง
For the curved line at the nose,
เราก็จะยืน
we will position ourselves facing forward,
แบบนี้นะครับไม่ตะแคง
not tilting left or right.
นะครับเส้นตรงกลางนะครับเส้นตรงกลางเราก็จะยืนสักแบบนี้เลยนะครับยืนสักตรงกลางนะครับค่อยๆโค้งจาก
We will stand in the middle, curving from either the left or right side based on comfort.
ที่เราถนัดนะครับ
If too much ink is collected and you're not confident, don't tattoo. It's better to wipe it off first.
ไปสักนะครับเราไม่ชำนาญเราต้องเช็ดออกก่อนนะครับช่วงที่
When the lines meet, we need to go slowly.
กันด้วยนะครับเราต้องช้าๆนะครับช้าๆเหมือนพื้นที่ต้องสัก
For areas that require tattooing like this,
เข็มแค่ใกล้ๆนะครับ
I will hold the needle close.
เราจำน้ำหนัก
We can manage the weight of our hands by holding the needle closely. If we hold it like this, it won't be comfortable. Holding it shorter is also fine. You can hold it like a pen. Next, we will apply color, starting with a dark blue. Tattooing it isn't too difficult. We will dip the needle in water as usual to prevent the ink from becoming too thick. After dipping in color, we should press down to ensure it sticks well. If blood mixes with the ink, It will make the work more difficult.
ทำงานยากนะครับนี่นะครับสังเกตมือผมนะครับมือประมาณ
As you can see, after about 2 to 3 passes, it will stick. We don't apply heavy pressure. We allow for areas that need reinforcement. Whether using hand or machine, if blood starts to ooze, it will complicate the tattooing process.
ตรงไหนพื้นที่แคบนะครับถ้าเกิด
In areas where the magnum needle can't reach, we will switch to RS or RL needles.
หรือ RL
Now the blue color is done,
สักแทนนะครับ
and I will proceed to tattoo green.
ผมจะสัก
The green will be applied around the mouth area.
เราจะลงในด้านขอบปากนะครับสีเขียวนี่น่าจะเหนียวเกินไปแล้วนะครับสีท่าน
If it seems too thick, we must dip it in water, using either plain water or a mixed solution.
น้ำยามิกซ์นะครับน้ำยาผสมสีนะครับ
We will gradually ensure the color is consistent.
เสมอกันนะครับ
Here, we will tattoo like this, standing in this position, gently using the edge of the needle to create sharp details.
ค่อยๆใช้ขอบเข็มย้ำนะครับ
Don't forget to leave space for the outline on both sides. They must be even.
เช็ดดูนะครับเราเช็ดดูให้ดีนะครับอย่าลืมนะครับเราเว้นขอบไว้นะครับต้องให้สม่ำเสมอกันนะครับขอบทั้งสองด้านนะครับ
If there's any blood seeping out, we need to wipe it away.
เข็มต้องลง
Aim to fill in the entire area gradually and slowly to ensure full coverage. ค่อยๆ Tap gently and gradually.
นะครับช้าๆ
This will help the ink settle well.
เต็มๆนะครับติดเต็มช่องนะครับ ตรงส่วนโค้งนะครับ
For the curves, we must keep the edges smoothly rounded.
เก็บขอบให้โค้งขนานกันนะครับ เราจะเช็ดน้ำมัน
We will regularly wipe with oil to check.
สีติดไม่
In areas where the ink isn't adhering well, we will reinforce those spots.
ละเอียดนะครับเราจะเว้นขอบ
We will leave the outlines like this. Remember, the needles must be arranged neatly.
เข็มต้องเรียงกันเป็นระเบียบนะครับส่วนไหนที่ไม่ละเอียด
In places where detail is lacking, we will gradually refine the corners.
นี่นะครับตะแคงถ้าเรา
If we're tattooing along the wider side of the needle, we will continue this way, keeping the lines closely and evenly spaced. Tap gently and gradually. This will help the ink settle well. ขอบนอกนะครับ The outer edges must also be consistent, smoothing them out to create a clean finish.
เหมือนกันนะครับ เก็บขอบไม่เนียนนะครับที่ผม
I often emphasize that when tattooing,
เวลา
the needle must be closely spaced. If they are close together, we can use the edge of the needle to blend instead of making lines.
เกี่ยเป็นแทนเส้นนะครับขอบเข็มเกี่ยแทนเส้นได้เลยนะครับ ตรงไหนที่มัน
In lower areas, we may need to crouch down
ย่อตัว
or adjust the chair or seating.
นะครับปรับที่นั่งแต่ถ้า
If tattooing for a short time, you can lean or bend down.
ลดย่อตัวลงนะครับแต่ถ้าสักนานๆ
But if it's a longer session, try to maintain the most comfortable position to avoid discomfort. Now, we will work on the inside, applying green first. We will reinforce from the inside, gradually rotating the needle. Reinforce the edges, ensuring they are even on both sides. Next, we will apply red. The process is the same. Leave a little edge.
ขอบเนื้อนิดนึงนะครับ ช่วงไหนที่เป็นช่องแคบๆ
In narrow spaces, we won't use the wider side.
เราจะใช้ฝั่ง
Instead,
แคบนะครับ
we will use the narrower side to tattoo.
เราก็จะ
We will slowly blend the color.
ไล่ให้สีติด เ ยังใช้11
We're still using the 11 Magnum to apply color at the appropriate size I've chosen.
ขนาดที่พอเหมาะที่ผมเลือกไว้แล้วนะครับตรงไหนที่ดังๆ
If there are any patchy areas, we will gradually clean them up to ensure an even application.
สีเหลืองเบาๆ
Tattoo lightly with the yellow.
ค่อยนะครับเปลี่ยนเข็มนะครับ
Let's switch to the 7 Magnum instead.
ดีกว่านะครับรู้สึกว่า
If we feel that a needle size is not working well,
ส่วนไหนที่
we can switch to a different size based on what feels comfortable.
แล้วเรารู้สึกไม่โอเคเราก็เปลี่ยนเบอร์ได้นะครับเอาตามที่เราถนัดนะครับ
The 7 Magnum should adhere more quickly, providing a smoother finish.
ขอบน่าจะเรียบสวยกว่านะครับ ลำดับถัดไป
Next,
ผมจะสาธิต
I will demonstrate how to use the 7RL needle for outlining letters,
การเดินเส้นนะครับเป็นตัวหนังสือนะครับแล้วก็
and the 5 curved Magnum needle for coloring.
สำหรับลงสีเข็มกลัด
Each needle has different sizes,
ต่างกันนะครับขนาด
and we will use the brands we are familiar with.
เราใช้ประจำนะครับเลือกดูยี่ห้อไหนดีเราก็ใช้ยี่ห้อนั้นนะครับเริ่มต้น
We will start with the 7RL needle as before.
เหมือนเดิมนะครับเวลาเข็ม
When the needle touches the skin, the ink should adhere and flow along the needle tip.
ถ้าเรารีบ
If we rush,
เรารีบมาก
the needle will jump,
เข็มจะ
and the lines will not be aligned,
ไม่เรียงกันนะครับเส้น
resulting in dots instead of solid lines.
ไม่เป็นเส้นนะครับเวลา
When outlining,
เราต้อง
we must go slowly,
ค่อยๆจุดให้เส้น
carefully connecting the points to create a continuous line. We should tattoo lightly, because if we apply too much pressure and then reinforce, it could cause wounds. If the ink isn't adhering well, we can reinforce those areas. A key point is that if the ink doesn't flow along the needle, the color won't stick.
สีไม่ติดนะครับเวลาสักวง
When tattooing circles or ovals, we need to concentrate.
วงกลมหรือวงรีนะครับเส้นตรงนะครับ
For horizontal straight lines, we will position ourselves parallel to the line.
นี้นะครับหันหน้าขนานกับเส้นนะครับถ้าเส้น
For vertical lines, we will also face parallel to the line.
หน้าขนานกันกับเส้นเหมือนกันนะครับ เราสามารถย้ำสอง
We can reinforce twice,
รอบที่สองเราย้ำ
with the second pass being lighter.
เพราะว่าถ้า
If we press too hard,
เส้น
the line may swell and appear
บว
crooked.
มนะครับบวมแล้วก็ดูเหมือนไม่ตรงนะครับตัวหนังสือ
Tattooing letters isn't easy.
สักง่ายนะครับสักให้ตรง
Keeping the lines straight or curved according to the design can be challenging.
ไม่ได้สักง่ายนะครับสักค่อนข้างยากอยู่นะครับส่วนใหญ่
And the lines can easily go off course.
ไม่ค่อยตรงนะครับมันเบี้ยวนะครับเบี้ยวง่ายนะครับ
We need to take our time,
ค่อยๆสักตรงไหน
gradually tattooing along the stencil lines.
รอยสเต็นซิลที่เราติดนะครับ
If too much ink drips, we need to wipe it away.
เกินไปนะครับ
Otherwise, we won't be able to see where the needle is going.
มองไม่เห็นว่าปลายเข็มเราไปตรงไหนนะครับ
The thinner the line, the greater the chance of the numbers or letters becoming
ตัว
crooked.
เลขหรือตัวหนังสือจะเบี้ยวนะครับจะไม่ค่อยตรงนะครับ เ
I recommend practicing with smaller needles first. Once you are comfortable with smaller needles, you won't have a problem with larger ones. Smaller needles are more difficult to control. Especially in curved areas. The RL needle should be practiced until you are proficient, because we will be using it often. Start with the 3RL needle, practicing small lines, circles, and straight lines frequently. For curved areas, tattoo slowly and rotate your hand to guide the needle. Your right hand is essential for controlling the needle's tip in curves. For softer skin, you need an assistant to stretch the skin. If there is no assistant, the skin won't be taut, and you will need to apply more pressure. If you apply too much pressure, the ink will break under the skin, resulting in swollen lines. Having an assistant makes tattooing easier. If there is no assistant, practice tattooing in areas with taut skin. If you are not proficient and try tattooing soft skin, it will be challenging, and the work will suffer. For straight lines, take your time and observe my technique. Tattoo slowly and steadily. If you can tattoo straight lines and circles well, your work will come out nicely. For small lines, you must keep them straight and parallel. Because if they aren't, it will look like the letters are crooked. From the beginning, when creating the design and applying the stencil, every step is crucial. I will start by tattooing the small lines. If we can tattoo small lines like this, it should be better because we can see the line more clearly. You should tattoo in this position, as it helps you see the lines clearly. Alternatively, you can tattoo from this side for lines in this direction. But if the lines slant like this, then we will stand at an angle like this. The needle should also be tilted as I demonstrate. I prefer to hold the needle close. If we want a precise line, we will position ourselves parallel to it, whether from below or above. Next, I will tattoo the red color in the middle, creating a heart shape using the 5 Magnum needle, size 0.35. We will tattoo slowly. The 5 Magnum needle adheres easily, and the smaller needles stick well, providing good dark ink. We will gradually reinforce to ensure even coverage.
ติดสม่ำเสมอนะครับเราไม่
We won't outline here.
เส้นนะครับ
If it's just one color like red, we can use the front edge of the needle to fill in the borders.
ขอบเข็มนะครับ
We will use the needle's edge to press down, similar to outlining.
เราก็จะใช้ขอบเข็มนะครับเหมือนเดิมขอบเข็มเขี่ยนะครับเขี่ยคล้ายๆเดินเส้นนะครับสีไปอยู่ที่ผิวนะ
The color will be applied to the skin, and you'll notice it will appear a bit watery or faded.
เหมือนสีมันน้ำๆนะครับเป็นน้ำๆมันจางๆนะครับเราก็
We will check to see if there are any areas where the color hasn't adhered well or is not vibrant.
ที่ยังไม่ติดนะครับหรือติดไม่เข้ม
We will gradually refine those details.
เก็บนะครับเก็บรายละเอียด เราก็เดิน
while maintaining the straight lines as before.
แนวดิ่งนะครับเส้นแนวราบ
For vertical lines, it's crucial to keep them straight.
แบบนี้นะครับ
When tattooing horizontal lines, they must be parallel. Otherwise, they will appear crooked.
ล่างนะครับให้เส้น
I will tattoo the horizontal line first, ensuring that the top and bottom lines are parallel.
หลังจากเถิบเข้ามาด้านในแขนนะครับผิวหนังจะเริ่มอ่อนนะครับช่วง
As we move inwards towards the arm, the skin will start to become softer.
นะครับเราต้อง
In areas where the skin becomes thinner, we must tattoo carefully, as the ink can break beneath the skin, causing crooked lines.
น้ำหนักมือต้อง
The pressure must be consistent.
ออกแล้วก็ต้อง
After wiping away excess ink, check the stencil to ensure all the lines are clear.
หรือยังนะครับถ้าไม่อย่างนั้น
Otherwise, areas with stencil marks may not hold ink well.
หมึกไม่ติดนะครับไม้จะเอียง
The angle of the needle must align with the direction of the
อ
lines.
ย่างนี้นะครับเส้นอย่างนี้
Observe how I tilt the needle to match the angle.
องศาจะเอียงไปกับเส้นเลยนะครับองศาของไม้นะครับนี่นะครับไม้จะเอียงมาแบบนี้นะครับ
If there are still areas that aren't clear and show red marks, we can reinforce those.
เวลาเราย้ำ
When reinforcing, apply light pressure.
เป็นรอย
We're just enhancing the existing line without pressing too hard.
ไม่สักลงไปแรงเกินไปนะครับย้ำเบาๆนะครับ
All done.
สำหรับ
Next,
ไปนะครับผมจะสาธิต
I will demonstrate how to use a 5RL needle for outlining and dot work.
เส้นแล้วก็จุดนะครับหรือเป็นดอทนะครับแล้ว
I will also use a 4F needle, which has 4 rows arranged in a single line for smaller outlines.
เดินเส้นเล็กๆนะครับมาเริ่มกันเลยนะครับ
Let's get started.
ใช้เบอร์
I will begin with the 5RL needle to create a dot in the center.
เริ่มสักจากดอทตรงกลางนะครับด้าม
The needle should be angled 90 degrees to the skin.
หนังนะครับตรงๆนะครับ90องศานะครับเบาๆ
Apply very light pressure just enough for the needle to penetrate the skin and deposit the ink beneath the surface. You barely need to press down, just a gentle touch.
อย่าลืมนะครับตัว
Remember,
นะครับต้อง
the ink must be as close to the needle tip as possible.
ถ้าหมึก
If the ink is too high up or stuck on the bar, it won't reach the needle
แบ
tip.
บนั้นเราอาจจะต้อง
In such cases, you may need to adjust the needle to shorten it, or you could use a wax drop to help the ink adhere to the wax bead.
ที่น้ำตาเทียนนะครับนี่นะครับ
As you can see, I'm keeping the needle at a 90-degree angle to the flat surface of the skin.
ผิวราบลงมาอย่างนี้นะครับตัวเข็ม
When tattooing on curved skin, the needle must follow the same angle relative to the skin,
ขากับผิวนะครับผิวโค้งแบบนี้
like this,
อยู่ลักษณะแบบนี้นะครับเข็มผิวด้านบน
like this.
เข็มอยู่ลักษณะประมาณแบบนี้นะครับ ก็สำคัญ
Lighting is also important. Make sure not to cast shadows.
ถ้าบัง
as that can obstruct your view and lead to mistakes.
เดี๋ยวจะเวลาเราสักจะผิดพลาดได้นะครับ
My assistant will pull the skin taut, just like this on the arm,
ดึงแบบนี้นะครับดึง
pulling straight down along the skin's
ตา
contour,
มแนวดิ่งของผิวนะครับดึงลงมาอย่างนี้นะครับไม่ใช่
not out to the side.
แล้วมือ
My left hand will assist as well.
มือเราข้างซ้ายนะครับก็ต้องดึงผิวช่วยนะครับ เดี๋ยวผมจะสักตัวโอมด้านใน
Now,
นะครับ
I'm going to tattoo the inner part of the arm, using the 5RL round needle to create small lines and dots.
เดินเส้นนะครับเดินเส้นเล็กๆนะครับจะมีจุด
I'll begin by dotting the arm,
บนเราก็จุดตัวโอมนะครับ
like this.
ขีดเส้นนะครับ
and then connect the dots into a continuous line. For the curved lines, I will position myself like this. เส้นโค้ง I need to be cautious and proceed slowly with the small lines.
เส้นเล็กๆนะ
If too much ink drops onto the skin, we will clean it up to ensure that the ink runs just along the needle's tip.
เช็ดออกนะครับเราจะให้หมึกวิ่งไปนิดเดียวตามแค่ปลายเข็มนะครับ
Sometimes I might not talk during these curves or when making very straight lines because I need to focus.
ตอนที่โค้งหรือตอนที่ทำเส้นตรงมากๆบางทีผมอาจจะต้องใช้สมาธินะครับค่อยๆ
It's important to proceed gradually
เราสัก
and to apply light pressure.
นะครับ
If any line is not straight, I may need to adjust it.
เราอาจจะต้องแก้ไขนะครับ
For straight lines like this one, I keep my eyes parallel to the line.
นี่นะครับ
My face will be oriented this way.
หน้าผมก็จะอยู่อย่างนี้นะครับ
With the flat needle, the lines will be very thin, and there's a high chance that they won't be straight. So focus is essential. I will start from the inside and work my way out, ensuring that the ink flows consistently to the needle's tip. The flat needle goes into the skin very easily. We should apply a very light touch, as the ink will not saturate the skin deeply. It will merely run along the needle's tip.
หมึกจะวิ่งไปที่ผิวแค่ตามปลายเข็มเท่านั้นนะครับที่ผมใช้นี่คือ
I'm using a 0.35 needle here. If I use a 0.25 or 0.30, the lines will be even finer, while a 0.40 will produce slightly thicker lines.
ถ้าเป็น 0.40 เส้นก็จะใหญ่ขึ้นกว่านี้นิดหน่อยนะครับเหมือนเส้นอยู่อย่างนี้
Both of my assistant's hands need to be positioned on either side, pulling down as I tattoo.
ดึงออกสองข้างนะครับเหมือนผมจะสักเส้นตรงนี้นะครับมือต้องดึงออกอย่างนี้นะครับจะไม่
They should not pull out to the side because that would make it difficult for me to
ถ้า
tattoo.
ดึงด้านข้างนี้เส้นจะไม่ตรงนะครับเราจะสักยากถ้าเส้นยาว
For longer lines, we will draw all the way to the end of my hand, and then I will need to lower my hand.
ต้องเลื่อนนะครับ
Do not resist.
มานะครับอย่าฝืนนะครับ
Maintain a steady hand.
เข็มต้อง
Ensuring that the needle remains aligned without tilting left or right.
เสมอนะครับเรียงต่อกันไปสม่ำเสมอจะไม่เอียงซ้ายหรือ
Otherwise,
เอียงขวานะ
the lines will become
เอียง
crooked.
ขวานี่เส้นจะเบี้ยวเลยนะครับไปตามแนวตลอด
Always keep your lines parallel and curved according to the design.
โค้งก็คือต้องโค้งไปอย่างนี้ตลอดนะครับสักไปอย่างนี้นะครับสักไปตรงๆอย่างนี้บิดนิดนึงก็ไม่ได้
With just a slight twist, the line will become crooked.
เล็กที่เราต้องการมันจะเบี้ยวทันทีนะครับ
If you master using the flat needle, the lines will be fine and beautiful. When working with the flat needle, it may initially appear that the lines are just dots. It's best to wait about a day before checking them again, as the lines tattooed with the flat needle will thicken a bit. Now, I will add some touch-ups to ensure the lines look a little bolder. That completes the tattooing with the 4F needle, while the inner arm was done with the 5RL needle, and the dot work was also done with the 5RL. For this piece, the skin in this area is delicate, so we need to tattoo slowly. If we apply too much pressure, the lines will become thick and swollen. I will be using only the 5RL needle. While it's not the smallest needle, it produces a nice line. The needle must always be above the bar for visibility. For beginners, it is crucial to have an assistant hold the skin taut. If there's no assistant available, we can ask our client or a friend to help hold the arm tight like this. The skin in this area needs to be pulled tight. The arm may need to be bent in this manner, or extended out to keep it taut. If we are tattooing in a regular position without an assistant, it will be difficult to keep the lines straight. Whether we are creating curved or straight lines, we need to keep rotating the needle so that it remains above the bar at all times. Be careful not to let your hand slip while pulling the skin tight. When using the RL needle for outlining, we can also use it for lettering, symbols, or even the Yant. It can be adapted for various designs. It's important to note that different areas of the body require different amounts of pressure. If a line shows red but isn't dark, we can dip the needle in ink and gently tap to avoid breaking the line. Tap gently and gradually. This will help the ink settle well. This area of skin is quite soft and thin, so we must proceed carefully. In fact, if we become proficient with the RL needle, we can create various designs, including small dots, lettering, and fine lines. The RL needle is versatile, and it can also be used for small shaded areas. For curves, we should tattoo slowly, focusing on creating sharp and beautiful lines rather than rushing. If we press too hard, we will know immediately because the ink will spread beneath the surface. For longer lines, we could use a magnum needle, which may work better for longer stretches. However, for this demonstration, I want to show that the RL needle can be used in multiple ways. Typically, for longer lines, a magnum needle is preferred. But using the RL needle on delicate skin like this can easily result in crooked lines. We need to be especially cautious when tattooing on soft skin. The softer the skin area, the more careful you need to be when tattooing. Next, I will demonstrate using the 3RL needle, as well as the 7RS, 7 curved magnum, 0.30, and the 5 curved magnum needle. I've flattened the 5 curved magnum needle to use for detail work. I will be tattooing my own dog. I'll start with the 7 curved magnum needle, tattooing the details from the bottom up. I will use a light color with about 3 drops of black mixed with white. I'll begin with a lighter shade, and I'll gradually add darker shades where necessary later on. For the darker areas, I will intensify the color a bit. This is the chin area. And I will start lightly. For areas where I want more depth later, I will build up the intensity. For the fur, I'll use the edge of the needle, applying it like outlining. The lines will be a bit streaky, so I need to use a very light touch. I'll complete the important details first, and then I can tidy up the smaller details later. I need to be gentle to avoid creating red marks, which would make tattooing more difficult, especially since I'll be working on shading. I'll try to minimize redness. For the edges, I'll use 100% black ink. I'll focus on marking it out first. Use the edge of the needle to blend back and forth, applying light pressure. I will create a soft texture that resembles fur. It might be a bit jerky. It hurts. When tattooing, we don't need to press hard. A light touch is sufficient. Just let the needle pass through the skin slightly. In this area, I'll create some darker edges. For shading, I will use the same technique. Lightly dabbing and mixing the ink with water. I'll also mix in some white for highlights. I'll gradually fill in the details, especially the darker parts of the eyes using the 7RS needle. For smaller areas, I'll switch to the 3RL needle for the tiny fur beneath the nose. I'll continue to use the 7 curved magnum needle, gently working from the bottom of the mouth upwards. Including the fur under the mouth. I will add details as needed. For solid black areas, I'll use 100% black ink, filling them in slowly. The nostrils will be a bit darker, providing the deepest shade. I'll focus on the nostrils first, using the 7RS needle, and applying firm pressure to cover the entire needle. I'll blend it evenly. After finishing, I'll clean off the stencil completely to see clearly. I will use white ink for highlights along the bottom edge after the work is complete. Where the ink is dark, I'll go over those areas again. Paying extra attention to the details of the eyes. I'll go slowly with the 3RL needle. And then I'll switch to the 7RS for the edges, leaving space for white highlights at the corners of the eyes. The upper eye area will be a bit darker. And I can use the edge of the 7RS to blend gently. We can collect the fine details slowly. Tap gently and gradually. This will help the ink settle well. I will use the 7 curved magnum to darken it slightly. We also need to leave some space because it will blend into the fur. The 11 Magnum needle is better for soft details, creating a smoother shadow. If anyone wants to try what I'm doing, they should go ahead. Tattooing ourselves helps us understand the right pressure and feel. When tattooing others, we will know what pressure works best. Applying light pressure. For the ears, I will create a shaded, furry texture without pressing too hard. I'll blend back and forth, gently. Using the 7 Magnum needle, going up and down slowly. It's similar to outlining, but the pressure is different. We'll continue blending while using 100% black ink, but with a light touch. We need to control the pressure to ensure the ink adheres properly. The softer the skin area, the more careful you need to be when tattooing. Even though we may feel pain, we must try to control the pressure to ensure the ink stays well. Otherwise, we may feel pain without any ink going in. I'll use the needle edge to gently tidy up the outlines, ensuring they are sharp. Tattoo the eye area with sharp, detailed lines. Since I started tattooing as a child, I haven't tattooed myself in many years. It's been quite a long time since I last did this. It still hurts, but I can endure it because I enjoy it. I will use the 7RS needle to add white highlights. For the next segment, I will demonstrate how to use needles. The handle is made of aluminum, and the tip is stainless steel. This one is a 7-curved Magnum needle, and this is a 3RL needle for small lines. This one is a custom-made 3F needle for fine lines. I will start with the 3RL needle first. Let's start by gently tattooing to see if the ink adheres to the skin. The tip being stainless steel means it won't absorb ink. When we bind the needle, it's different from bamboo. Bamboo tends to soak ink into the wood. The stainless steel material is heavier, while bamboo is lighter. With the 3RL needle, we need to proceed slowly while drawing lines. I will use the 7 curved magnum needle to fill in the infinity line. I will use the 7 magnum curved needle to create the line and fill in the color with the same needle. We'll use this side of the needle for filling in the black, and the other side for lining. When filling, I will repeat about 3 to 4 times to ensure a consistent dark color. The filling can be done while tilting the needle, similar to drawing lines, but with lighter pressure. We will fill the area completely within the stencil, ensuring that the edges are sharp as if we were using an RL needle. I will tilt the needle to the side while tattooing. The assistant must keep the skin taut at all times. If you feel the skin bouncing, it indicates that the area isn't taut enough. When tattooing at the side, I will tilt the needle like this, similar to how the client's skin is angled. If I need to tattoo the upper skin, I will do so at this angle. If you're not comfortable, rotate the client's arm upward. I will use oil to wipe away the stencil marks to check if the tattoo is applied evenly. When repeating, be gentle. Just retouch the areas that don't appear even. We will lightly reapply using the edge of the needle to mimic line drawing. In truth, there's hardly any pressure involved. It feels more like letting your hand drop. If you're not comfortable, you may need to stand to keep the angle right. If you tattoo at a slant, the needle won't penetrate straight, and the ink will spread beneath the skin, making the lines unclear and blurred. When bending, the needle should curve like this. We need to move our hand and twist our body. If we don't twist, the line may not remain straight. If the stencil is too thick, we need to wipe it off carefully to ensure that the ink is consistently applied. Next, I will use the 3F needle to tattoo fine lines. First, I will apply Vaseline and ensure the ink is close to the needle tip. We need a good amount of ink, but make sure to wipe off the excess. Since we're creating fine lines. If the needle doesn't curve properly, the lines will be uneven, resulting in varying thickness. I will use the 3F needle to complete the outer wing. The 3F needle is small like this. We must practice to ensure smooth execution. For beginners, the needle may not curve perfectly, but the points should connect continuously. Observe how I stand and how I place my hands while pulling. The way we stand is crucial. When we dip the ink, it shouldn't stay on the wood. If this happens, we can use wax to remedy it. If wax isn't available, Vaseline can substitute. Most importantly, when tattooing, the ink must be as close to the needle tip as possible. If the ink is on the upper part of the wood, we will need to apply more pressure to get it on the skin, which is incorrect. This will cause discomfort for the client, and the quality of our work will suffer. The ink should sit close to the tip, about 0.5 millimeters away. The tip should contact the skin directly to ensure proper ink transfer. Using a 7-curved magnum needle of 0.30 with black ink, I will dip it into water to lighten the color. We won't make it too dark. We want a lighter shade. If we desire a darker shade inside, we will gradually increase the intensity. I will use the 3RL needle to touch up the edges where the details aren't sharp. As I mentioned, The ink must adhere to the skin like this. Like this. Like this. When the ink touches the skin, it should already be absorbed into the skin. Like this. We need to ensure that when applying oil, it's a thin layer to keep the skin smooth. If it's too thick, the ink won't adhere. This skin curves down on this side. So I will adjust my position to tattoo on this side. At the connection point between the old and new lines, we must align them perfectly. They should meet precisely. Not overlap incorrectly. I often have to wipe off the stencil as I work to avoid visual confusion. Some lines may not stick, but if the stencil is still on, we need to wipe it off and check carefully. For small areas, we can use the edge of the needle to detail. Dip the needle in ink. I'll be standing for this part. I'm using the side edge of the needle. I will keep my equipment and needle size appropriate for the task. The needle's handle should tilt toward my right side. I will use the edge to detail the upper area, ensuring the needle is angled correctly. Angle the needle to refine the edges. Be careful not to go outside the lines. When using the edge of the needle, watch my hand closely. Imagine there are 7 needles, and only half of them will be used. Just about this much. Next, I'll demonstrate how to use the 3RL needle and the 7 curved magnum needle, which I've heated to ensure the needles are aligned in a single row, not in layers. I also have a flat needle, one with 2 pieces and another with 3 pieces. I will start with the 3 flat needle to create small lines. I'll apply some Vaseline between my thumb and index finger to help it glide. I'll begin with the 3-flat needle to tattoo the words, Love Mom.
สักคำว่า Love Mom ก่อนนะครับจะใช้เข็ม3แฟลตนะครับ
If I feel that any lines aren't curved enough, or if I want to add detail, I can use the 3RL needle for that.
ช่วยได้นะครับ
Using a flat needle makes it easier for the ink to spread under the skin.
แตกใต้ผิวนะครับเข็มแฟลตนี่สำคัญนะครับสำคัญ
It's essential to practice fine details.
เล็กๆนะครับ
And maintain a steady hand with the flat needle. For the outer lines, I'll use the 7 curved Magnum needle.
นะครับที่กดให้แบนนะครับ
Applying it gently. It's similar to using a single needle, but it's actually 2 needles together, which helps hold more ink for smaller lines. Tattooing small lines can be quite challenging. So I need to ensure my fingers are aligned properly.
ดูนิ้วมือนะครับเราต้องเวลาสักนะครับ
The flat side of the needle should run parallel to the line I'm tattooing.
ด้านแบนของเข็มจะขนานไปกับเส้นนะครับ
By using paired needles like this,
อย่างนี้นะครับจริงๆใช้
using a 3 or 5 RL needle gives a relatively stiff line compared to using a Magnum needle,
เส้นจะค่อนข้างแข็งนะครับดูค่อนข้างแข็งแต่
whether it's a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7.
ไม่ว่าจะเป็น2 3 4 5 6 7เป็นเข็มแบนนะครับถ้าเราสักแล้วก็เข็มมันเรียงกัน
If we tattoo well, we can achieve a softer look compared to using round needles for lettering.
มากกว่าที่เราใช้เข็มกลมสักนะครับ
If the letters are too small, I'll use the RL needles instead. Flat needles can be tricky for small letters.
ยากนะครับถ้าตัวหนังสือเล็กๆนะครับ
For longer lines, I will choose a larger flat needle.
ใหญ่ขึ้นนะครับ เราจะใช้เข็มแฟลตเบอร์ใหญ่ใน
especially for curves and longer, straighter areas.
มีส่วนตรงแล้วก็ไม่
If the curve is too narrow, a larger needle may not work well.
แคบนะครับถ้าจังหวะแคบจะไม่เหมาะกับเข็มที่เบอร์ใหญ่เกินไปนะครับ เพราะว่าเวลาโค้งจะโค้งได้ไม่ดีนะครับ เ
While tattooing, I will try to rotate the client's arm to keep the tattooing surface at the best angle. I won't tilt the needle unless absolutely necessary, and I'll only do so in tight spaces. If we can still adjust the client's skin to a position that is most comfortable for the artist to tattoo, we should do so. A larger magnum needle allows for faster tattooing because it can hold more ink, but it can be challenging for tight curves. If I'm uncertain about the ink saturation, I can wipe it off to check if the stencil is too dark. For areas where the 7 Magnum needle struggles with curves, I'll switch to the 3RL needle or the 3 flat needle, depending on what I'm comfortable with. I will use the edge of the needle to tattoo the corner area. I must keep the ink at the tip of the needle and not overload it, as it makes it difficult to see the line. It's unnecessary to apply excessive pressure. Instead, I should let the weight of the needle do the work. If I press too hard, the line will appear larger. Particularly in areas with tight curves. For curves, I'll use smaller needles, such as a 2 or 3, depending on the curve's sharpness. If I feel a line isn't satisfactory, I can tidy it up after checking the stencil. I'll ensure that the connection between lines is seamless. Where the lines are about to meet, you must go slowly to ensure they connect perfectly. If you've already done the lining once and need to go over it again, do it gently. For areas where the 7 Magnum needle struggles with curves, I'll switch to the smaller 3 needle. Which requires a very light touch, just a gentle pass over the skin. The smaller the needle, the lighter the pressure I should use. If a line doesn't meet my standards, I can go back and add more gently. While tattooing real skin, it's crucial to use a light touch. If I apply too much pressure, the ink can spread beneath the skin, causing a blurred line. When filling in, I need to hold the needle short and steady, allowing for easier control. This hand does not grip the bamboo stick tightly, it only supports it. The bamboo can be rotated by right hand as needed. Look closely here. My thumb will guide the needle, allowing for smooth left and right movements with very light pressure. This way, I can achieve the delicate lines I desire. To provide tattoo artists and enthusiasts with free access to the art of bamboo tattooing, I sincerely hope that this educational material will help promote and preserve the traditional Thai bamboo tattooing art, ensuring it continues to be passed on to future generations. I encourage everyone. If I can do it, you can do it too.